Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a special program on Radio Islam International. We are honored to have at our studios this afternoon a world-renowned personality, Ali Abunimah, who is the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. Ali's voice is very familiar to the listeners. We've chatted to him for a number of years, and he has always availed himself very kindly to speak about issues related to Palestine. We're honored to have him here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the studios of Radio Islam.
Alaikum assalam. It's kind of hard to believe I'm here in Lenasia, but I'm thrilled to be here, in person with you. So it's great to be here.
I understand that you visited South Africa maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and coming back to South Africa, what was the feeling like?
I came in 2010, just before the World Cup. So everyone was talking about the World Cup. I remember that, and to me the big difference is to see how much more activism there is in solidarity with Palestine. BDS South Africa has grown tremendously, but generally the feeling in South Africa is so uplifting in so many ways. I don't mean to say that South Africa is a country that where everything is just happy and there's no difficulty, but I feel like it's a place where people are struggling to make their world and the world around them better, and where the struggle is still alive, and that's very inspiring.
Certainly the struggle is still alive. Now, when we look at activism, and you commented about that, the activism has grown in South Africa, but in activism there's obviously the uphills, there are the moments when you may feel down, there's the negativity that comes with it, and people look towards Electronic Intifada for inspiration, for that motivation. How do you keep yourself motivated?
Well, number one, I think this is important, and I can see this is true here, that you have to work with great people who share your goals and your mission, and that's the community around you. Number one is what keeps you strong. A commitment to doing the work, doing it to the highest quality, the feeling that this is a way we can contribute. Our contribution is to give people accurate information, reporting. We're very proud to work with young reporters in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, to help them get their stories out. We're working with young video makers there. It's tremendously rewarding when we see their work being shared around the world and that their voices are being heard. So the feeling that we can make a contribution, we can educate, mobilize, and inspire people to act for justice in Palestine makes us not feel powerless, so it keeps us going.
Certainly. We are into day 2 of the Israeli Apartheid Week in South Africa, and you have come to South Africa as a guest of BDS South Africa. We find that if we look across the globe, that the momentum with regards to BDS continues to grow. What has changed the tide in this regard?
Yeah, the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, just, to give a basic background for those who are hearing about this for the first time. This was a movement launched in 2005 by more than 170 Palestinian civil society organizations, and the basic premise is very simple, that Palestinians are oppressed, they're denied their freedom, their basic rights, their freedom of movement, their access to their land, their water, their right to return to their country. The most basic rights are denied to them, and the world has been watching for decades as Israel continues to do this. And so the logic of the BDS movement is that people power should be mobilized around the world. So, and it was inspired very much by the global solidarity with the struggle against apartheid in this country. So what has happened since 2005 is that the movement has really gained momentum as people have seen the successes, and this includes forcing big multinational companies to end their business with Israel, to end their business that is supporting the settlements, supporting military occupation. We've seen major artists and performers refusing to go to Tel Aviv, just as they used to refused to come to Sun City in South Africa. Both regimes, Israel and apartheid South Africa, tried to use culture and music to whitewash their crimes and to say, oh, you know, we are highly cultured societies and we enjoy art and we enjoy music. And the BDS movement says, no, we're not going to let you drown out the screams of Palestinian children in Israeli military prisons with nice music. We're going to boycott Israeli institutions, Israeli culture to make this point. Now, what has happened also is that Israel has recognized the power of this, because Israel has strong support from institutions, governments, but when people mobilize, they can't control that so easily. So Israel has declared the BDS movement a strategic threat. And to me, that's a measure of its success.
Yes, you know, very often we hear people talking about the strength of the pro-Israeli lobby, especially in the United States of America, and the fact that, you know, they've declared BDS as a threat to the existence. That in itself is an indication perhaps to the fact that the great success that BDS has attained. Do people at times perhaps overplay and exaggerate the strength of the pro-Israeli lobbies?
I think in a way they do, and I think the reason it's important not to is because if we buy into a narrative that Israel and its lobby are so strong and so influential and they get their way no matter what, then we disempower ourselves. We rob ourselves of the capacity to change the world. And I believe that we do have the ability to fundamentally change and transform the situation. I'll give you some examples. You know, the Israel lobby is still very strong in the American Congress. There's no doubt about that. But there has been such strong grassroots activism as well in the United States that they're starting to chip away at that strength. So, for example, we've had a campaign for several years called No Way to Treat a Child, which focuses on the currently more than 300 Palestinian children in Israeli military detention. These are children who are arrested in night raids in the middle of the night, dragged from their beds by heavily armed soldiers. It includes Ahmed Tamimi, the young Palestinian teenager who has been in a military prison now for more than 2 months because she was filmed shoving and slapping a heavily armed Israeli soldier who was invading her village, who had just shot her cousin in the head, her young 15-year-old cousin in the head, and now she is being subjected to a military trial. Those abuses are so systematic that even a number of lawmakers in Congress were convinced it had to end, and they introduced a bill that's currently before Congress to make it illegal for Israel to use U.S. military aid for the detention, torture, and abuse of Palestinian children. And so far, 21 members of Congress have signed on to that bill. That is a start, but it is a huge step compared to where we were, given the strength of that lobby.
If you've just tuned in, we have with us in the studios of Radio Islam world-renowned personality Ali Abunimah, the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. Ali, perhaps you could enlighten the listeners about the Electronic Intifada, share some background history about it. It's certainly been in the forefront of Palestinian activism.
Well, it started now almost 15 years ago, or actually more than 15 years ago, as the internet became available to us as an easy means or an inexpensive means to reach people, because what we found, particularly in the United States, is that Palestinian voices, the realities of Palestine, were totally shut out of the mainstream media. Everything was geared towards giving Israel's view. All the talking heads and guests were either pro-Israel or Israelis, and we didn't have a way to really talk about this. So we started off mostly as reacting to the media, reacting to this biased coverage. And then we thought, well, if we can publish things directly, why don't we actually start doing the reporting and doing the analysis the way we think it should be done? So we moved from doing more media criticism to actually becoming journalists ourselves. And as I mentioned, the thing I'm most proud about is our ability to work with young reporters in Palestine to get their stories out. And also, because we're independent, and this is critically important, we are not subject to the kind of censorship or pressure or self-censorship that we see so much other media subject to when it comes to Palestine. So we break the taboos. We discuss the things that they would rather we don't talk about normally.
The theme for this year's Israeli Apartheid Week is Afro-Palestinian solidarity. Why is this theme so important?
Well, that's a theme that the organizers here picked because we see Israel involved in Africa in some very nasty ways, and in very hypocritical ways, actually, because Israel has launched, on the one hand, this charm offensive or PR campaign in Africa to try to entice governments in Africa to support Israel in the United Nations. For example, you take the last vote on Jerusalem, Israel's position, after Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to reject that decision, call it illegal. Very few countries, I think 8 in total, voted with Israel. Several of them were small colonies of the United States. And only one country in Africa, I think, voted with Israel, and that was Togo. What's interesting about that is that Togo was supposed to be the host of an Israel-Africa summit where all the governments were going to be invited. Israel is marketing itself now as we bring high technology, we bring irrigation, we bring water management technology to all these poor countries that don't know how to do things themselves. Actually, this is the same sales pitch that the apartheid regime in South Africa used to sell itself across Africa and around the world. So Israel's marketing itself this way in order to win the votes of these countries at the UN, often with very dirty deals involving arms deals. We know, for example, that Israel was supplying arms to Rwanda before the genocide. The Israeli government has gone to court to prevent that information coming out. Israel has been supplying weapons that have been fueling ethnic cleansing and mass killings in South Sudan and in Burundi. And at the same time, Israel's treatment of refugees from African countries has been absolutely atrocious. Currently, Israel is beginning the mass deportation of Africans, particularly from Eritrea and Sudan, but other countries as well. The UN Human Rights Office has warned that they are sending people back to very dangerous conditions and that they are being singled out for their race. In other words, Israel is targeting black Africans for deportation. There are other refugees and asylum seekers in Israel who are not being targeted for this mass deportation. This particularly targets Africans. And the reason why is because we've seen all of these top Israeli leaders from Netanyahu down declaring that Africans present a threat to the identity of Israel. We've seen Israeli leaders say that Israel is a white man's country, which is ironic given the fact that something like 60% of Israeli Jews don't originate from European countries. They originate from North Africa, from the Arab world, and so on. But Zionism as an ideology has made Israeli Jews believe that they're part of this white European race that is superior to others, and we see that in the mass deportation and violence against Africans.
Yes, that gives us insight as to the theme that has been chosen here in South Africa. Now, Ali, you've been a proponent of the one-state solution, but when we talk of one-state solution and two-state solution, these are words that we hear very often, but there's different interpretations. There's the one-state solution, which Donald Trump talks about. So perhaps you could unpack that for our listeners.
You're exactly right. I mean, what I mean by a one-state solution is very simple. It means one person, one vote, a constitution that protects everyone, freedom of religion for everyone, freedom to have their language, to educate their children in their language, and freedom of movement and restitution. I mean, does that sound like any country you've heard of?
Certainly. South Africa.
Oh, exactly. And what's so terrible about that? Well, one of the things we can learn from South Africa, and I think that is particularly important, is that having a great constitution doesn't solve overnight the legacy of apartheid, the entrenched inequality. As we were driving here from Lenasia, from Johannesburg, my host was Ismail. I don't know if I can say, if I'm allowed to say his name, but there we go. I'm not embarrassing him. But was showing me the different areas. This was designated as the colored area by the apartheid regime. This was the black area. This was the for the Indians. This segregation, its legacy is lasting. We know that. So I'm not saying that South Africa is the perfect utopia. But South Africa has a future. Free South Africa has a future. Apartheid South Africa offered no future. So that's what I mean by a one-state solution. And what Netanyahu means, or what Donald Trump means, is a one apartheid state solution, which is exactly what exists now. The pretense that there is a Palestinian state and a Palestinian flag and all of this is just that. It's a pretense. It is exactly like the Bantustans that were in this country. And in fact, we have to remember, when we go back to the history, that the planners of the Bantustans in South Africa, when the apartheid regime planned the Bantustans, Israelis came here to study them and to say, you have the solution for our quote-unquote Arab problem. So their idea of a Palestinian state was to tell the Palestinians, you can call it a state, we'll let you call it a state, but we're in control. And I think that offers no future. It's an illusion of statehood. It's an illusion of independence. And much better to recognize that all those who live on the land and in the land should have equal rights, with restitution, with decolonization, with justice. I don't think that's impossible.
What do you make of the fact that Saudi Arabia is getting cozy with Israel? One is the fact that it's a human rights issue, the whole Palestinian, and it's also a religious issue. Would you not have expected better from Saudi?
I honestly, let me make a distinction. Saudi people who are very vocal on social media are very clear in their strong support and identification of the Palestinian cause. And every ordinary Saudi I've met has been so strong in that support. I would say even stronger than many other people you could find. So we make that distinction with the regime, but honestly I wouldn't have expected better from the regime, because their interests and their view of the world is so different from those seeking liberation. What they're seeking is to preserve a status quo in the region that suits them, that suits family rule and despotic rule. And to the extent that they're willing to make a close alliance with Israel, to pursue their interests, including what it seems to be to want a war with Iran. I mean, whatever. I can't see how war with Iran would suit anyone. be anything but a catastrophe. But nevertheless, Israel and Saudi Arabia seem to be pushing in that direction. That's the basis of their alliance.
Israeli Apartheid Week is now in full flow here in South Africa. Now, why is this campaign so important to create awareness about the issues that Palestinians face on a daily basis? And is there any optimistic or any optimism that you'd like to leave our listeners with as a final message?
Well, you know, South Africa's representative at the UN said in January, that Israel today is the only country in the world that can be called an apartheid state. These words have a lot of weight because South Africa has the moral authority to speak about apartheid. But they also carry a responsibility to act, because apartheid, the crime of apartheid, is defined as one of the most heinous crimes against humanity in international law. What we know from the South African experience is that people in this country paid a tremendous price for their freedom, but they couldn't do it all alone. They needed global solidarity. And that's the message of Israeli Apartheid Week, that Palestinians need global solidarity. They need the support of South Africans. They need people to take part in boycott, divestment and sanctions. They need people to push the South African government to go further, to be more bold, to be an international leader, to say, we are not an economic or military superpower, but when it comes to fighting apartheid, we are a moral superpower.
Certainly a powerful message that is given to all South Africans that they need to take this forward. Ali, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. We're really thrilled to have you at the studios of Radio Islam. We appreciate you coming all the way, and we wish you a fruitful journey, the remaining part of your trip, and that there will be lots of beneficial discussions throughout the week and over into the weekend. Jazakumullah khair for coming to the studios of Radio Islam.
My pleasure, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
That was our special guest at the studios of Radio Islam, Ali Abunimah, the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada.